Hello and welcome to the 10th video in this series, making simple Floppy Robin using Cocos2d JavaScript. So the last video then, you remember we had the tube spawning simulated within a certain time window, more or less randomly. You can see here 2.8, 2.4, 2.5 seconds apart. In this video we're going to flesh this out a little bit. We're not actually going to show the tubes on the screen yet, that will be in the following video. We still need to add some logic inside this one. And this video is going to have quite a bit of code, and I'm actually going to do some copy and pasting in this one, otherwise the video is going to end up quite long. You can download the code anyway, but I will explain how the code works. The place we're going to start is in GameManager.js, and I made a mistake I noticed whilst I was preparing for this. The double gap bottom, I think, is the one. Should have had a capital G in. It didn't in the last video. It's spelled like this now. I noticed that when I was preparing for this video because my code didn't work. I've added one constant to GameManager.js, and that is KTube maxup pixels set to 180. And what is this? Well, I've prepared another very spectacular diagram here. In fact, that colour's absolutely awful. Can I find anything better? That. So if you imagine that this is the screen, let me find some kind of half-decent colour to just fill in the screen with. No, that's not so nice. That's not so nice either. That's a bit better. Okay. So, let's change it to this. So if you imagine that this grey here is the grey screen, is the game screen, sorry. We have an upper tube, a pair of tubes, and a lower tube. If the robin, and actually I'll make a little circle here to represent the robin. If the robin goes under a tube like this, then if the tube was all the way down here, and the robin had gone under this tube, and the next tube is one that's up here, say, then he's got a certain limit to how far he can get up when we hammer the screen consistently. And I found that this is around 180 pixels. Anything less and it becomes nigh on impossible to get over. So what we'll do is during the game is we'll make sure that the robin never has to overcome anything more than 180 pixels. So we've got this constant in here to deal with that. So going into the game then, game.js, into the game layer, we need to add a couple of variables to the object, and the first thing we need to do is add one called last tube type, and we need to add one called last get under y. So this one here, the last tube type, records the last type of tubes we generated because we don't want to repeat. So if we generate a pair, then we don't want to generate a pair immediately following that. That's just personal taste. And the other one is this last get under y. So what this is here, if the y position of this tube here, so at the bottom where I am just with the mouse here, is, I don't know, 200 pixels, and the robin went here, its last get under y would be 200. This one here, if it went through, probably be 350. This one here, however, because it's gone over, we would set this just to be the middle of the screen, so last under y to be the middle of the screen. And the reason we do this is because if you imagine that the robin has gone under this tube here, well, I said before that we don't want to force the robin to do more than 180 pixels in an upward direction. So we need to record this position here so that if we generate a tube that has too challenging a level to get over, that we can then reduce this level at least to the 180 pixels. I hope that makes some sense anyway with these blocks. So just minimize that. So that's what the last get under y is for. And we need to put these two also inside the onStart, or the start game function, where we'll now set this to this dot and middle y. So now we've done this, then the next thing we need to do is inside the onTick function, where we set the spawn time, we need to also call the spawn new tubes function, which is already here because I've already filled it in a little bit down below. So we actually get around to spawning our new tubes. And now if I scroll down to the bottom of this game layer object, you'll see here that we've got three functions already declared. So what happens here then? So spawn new tubes is called. The first thing we need to decide is what type we want to call. And once we've decided that, we then call the right function. So we either ask for a pair, or we ask for an upper or a lower. And once we've gone inside here, what pair is not pair. Once we've gone inside here we spawn upper or lower depending on the argument, and here we spawn a tube pair. And there are a couple of functions which you'll see in the next video which actually then put them on the screen. So without further ado, we'll start off then with the code for the spawn new tubes. Now you remember we've got 3 types of tube, the upper, lower and a pair. So we're going to generate a number from 1 to 3. And we're going to use that number to select which one we want to generate. So here I'm going to drop the code in, and what we're saying here is simply if, whoops, I don't want to do that, otherwise we lose the code. If our chance is 1, generate an upper, so the argument is true. If it's 2, generate a lower, otherwise generate, which will be 3, a tube pair. Now this is all well and good, but there's a small problem with this, of course, and it is that is not actually taking into account what the last type was that we generated. So if we generated last then an upper, then we could still generate an upper this time as well. So we need to add a little bit of code in to defend against that. Now there are various efficient ways of doing it. I've got the most inefficient, I think, here, but probably the most clear, which is why I've done it this way. So here we've got an infinite loop. So while 1, which is cheating, but never mind, and always dangerous. And if you imagine that we asked to generate an upper at the start of the game, so our chance is 1, we would ask, if our chance is 1, which it is, and the last tube type is upper, which it isn't, because it's none when we start the game, so we don't satisfy this condition, and we don't satisfy this or this, because our chance is 1. So we would end up here, just breaking out the while loop, and then we would activate this bit, which is spawn an upper. Now imagine we choose to spawn an upper again, so we choose a 1. Now what would happen is the last tube type would be an upper, and our chance would be 1, and therefore we would just regenerate our chance and loop round again. And then eventually we keep doing this until we got a 2 or a 3, so we got something different to the previous tube type. I'm sure that's fairly obvious, I don't need to labour the point. Once we've got through down here, then we call our upper or lower or our pair, and we go on into generating either one of these here. So the most complicated one of these is the up or the lower, and that's because of all the messing about we have to do with the gaps and things like that. So I'm going to drop the first piece of code in here and try and explain it as well as I can, although with a pen and paper it works. If we've got an upper, we set the last type to upper. If we've got an upper, we set the maximum y we want to the middle y. So we're setting the maximum here to be in the middle of the screen like this. And then we set the minimum y to be the constant, which is a gap, which is somewhere further down. So what you'll see if I go back to the code is we set the max y to be the middle of the screen, and then the single gap bottom is the minimum y we want. Otherwise, if it's the other way round, then we set y max to single gap top and y min to the middle y. So again, if the other way around is a lower, we want the minimum level to be the middle of the screen, and otherwise somewhere up here, leaving that gap to the top. The only thing we need to do with the lower is make sure that our y max minus the level that we got under last time. So imagine we've got the tube here, but the last tube it went under was here. We need to check that this gap, so this gap going from here to here, is less than our 180 pixels. If it's not, then we're going to reduce slightly our y max and set this to our last get underway plus the 180. And now we've got a range, let's say. We've got a minimum y and a maximum y that we can set our up or lower tube to. So what we want to do then is take this range, make sure it's a positive number, so we just do y max minus min and absolute, because depending on the way up the tube is, that could be the other way around. And then we want to get our y position, where we take our y max minus a random of this range. So just going back to the diagram here, I'm sure it's fairly clear by now, but if I take the lower, for instance, it might have had, let's say, a y max of here. Oops, that wasn't any good at all, was it? Darn it. Okay, so a y max here and a y min of here, so between these two. And now we're just finding a random position between these two arrows somewhere like this to set the top of the tube. So not too difficult, I don't think. Once we've done that, then all we need to do is set the last get under y variable, depending on whether it's an upper or not. Remember, if it's a lower, we just set it to the middle. Otherwise, because it's an upper, the robin has gone under the tube. And the last thing we'll do then is we will log to the console some of the output here. And I'm sorry again for all the copy and paste, but it just makes it a bit quicker. I'm sure you appreciate if I sat and typed all this out. One, I'd make a million errors, and two, it would take far too long. I've already been going 10 minutes or so. So the last one to do is the tube pair, which is much simpler. So the tube pair, excuse me, looks like this. So the first thing is we set the last tube type, and then we want to define the gap. So that's our minimum gap, anywhere leading up to our maximum gap, randomized. And now we want the range, which is the gap, the top of the gap minus the gap to the bottom of the gap to get our Y range. So that essentially, if you look it up, means we've got our pair here where we've set our gap, and now we want to know the range of Y that we can put this gap inside, with the top and the bottom Y being here. I'll just move this one out the way, and that as well, move this back. So say the top was there and the bottom was there, we want to know where we can put our gap within this range, like this. So once we've done that, then we then randomly select our top Y of where to position them, and then set our bottom Y to that minus the gap, so that we've got the tubes, and the last get under Y then of course is the top Y, so the top tube in the thing. And last but not least, what we can do is just log to the console what we've defined here, and that's actually all we need to do. So if I just go back to the browser and refresh and see how many errors I've managed to create, and now we'll just let a few run, we can see we've generated a lower, we've generated a pair, and now we've generated an upper. And we can see that the first one we generated was a lower with a Y position of 352, so that would probably look something like this. And then if I just go back to the browser, we generated then, let's have a look, spawn tubes, next spawn time, a pair with a top Y of 454 and bottom of 274. I can't exactly, I've completely forgotten the pixels on this, but probably something about like this. So they would be coming afterwards, about like this. And then last but not least, we then generated an upper with a position of 379. So a bit lower than the previous pair. Then let's just go back into here, which means this upper would probably have been around here like this. And just move all these back across. Bit of a mess, this diagram, but you get the idea. So we generated 3 pairs of tubes in a row that probably look something vaguely like this. So the robin would have had to have gone under and been, over, and then below, and then like this. Okay then, so that's it for this video. Everything's sort of set up and working. In the next video we can finally create our tube sprite and actually print these tubes and get them scrolling across the screen. So thanks very much for watching. I hope it made sense. Comments and questions welcome as always.